I must say, I appreciate how this place works like a clock. It's amazing. On the minute everybody starts, fantastic. As a person who is so not time conscious, this school actually might teach me to be more on time, which is good. Will be a good side benefit. Okay, so I said that today we're going to prepare for Yom Kippur, but I always like to start with some kind of a feedback. Last week we spoke about the concept of Laman Chalukim Chaim, of having the toolbox, where I think about my assets and I think about what Hashem gave me and I think about how I could use it to improve the world. That was our main idea. We also spoke about the concept of Simcha Badin, that somehow having law and order and a fair God who knows what he's doing is supposed to calm me down and not make me anxious. So this wasn't such an easy, applicable take-home message, but I am curious if anybody had any insights or comments. Don't feel you have to, but if you do, I'd love to hear. Yes, great. Your name?
I think everything you told us last class, the entire Rosh Hashanah kept in mind.
Oh, that's so gratifying. Thank you. I'm so happy to hear that. That makes it all worth it. Thank you. That's wonderful. Thank you. Anybody else? Any comments, insights? Sure, no problem. Okay, so we will move on. Today, what we're trying to do is focus on getting ready for Yom Kippur. And I'd like to start by an explanation of the way we view this time period based on the Nesiv Shalom. The Nesiv Shalom is a Slonim Rebbe. He probably will be quoted by a few of your teachers. I have a very funny story about the Nesiv Shalom. I have to say that a long time ago, I found this sefer, and I'm not Hasidish, but I definitely was enjoying the Nesiv Shalom, the Slonim Rebbe. And around the same time that I was enjoying the sefer, I was driving. I used to live in Telstone, which is like a little suburb outside of Yerushalayim. And I was driving, and I see a very, very, very old man walking. Like a very pious-looking old man. And he's walking with these tiny, tiny little baby steps. So my natural inclination was to stop and ask him if he needed a ride. I don't think it was going to take him 10 years to get to where he wanted to get to. So I stop, and I put down my window to ask this person if he wants a ride. And when I saw him, it looked like he was all by himself. All of a sudden, there's 20 Hasidim come out from behind the trees, and they make a circle around my car, and they're all looking in. And I figured I must have done something wrong. I don't know what I did. So I said, no, I wanted to ask the old man if he wants a ride. So they smiled at me. They said to me, the Slonim Rebbe likes to walk by himself. He's here on vacation. So I said, I can't believe I just offered the Slonim Rebbe a ride in my car. And then I had this impulse, which I controlled, to run home and get my sefer and ask him to autograph it. But I already made one mistake for the day, so I figured I wasn't going to do that. But so I was zocheh to actually see the Slonim Rebbe walking near my house. He passed away a little bit after that. So he was a very big tzaddik, and the sefer is very recommended, very beautiful. And he writes about understanding this time period. And he quotes from the pasuk every day in Kriya Shema. We say, "V'lo tasur achrei levavchem v'achrei nechem." You should not go after your heart and your eyes. And Chazal take this pasuk from Shema, and they say that every avera has 3 parts to it. It says, "Ha'ayin ro'eh," the eye sees something. "Halev chomed," the heart desires. "V'haguf oseh tama'aseh," and the body does the action. Okay. So what he says about this, and he conceptualizes it much bigger than what Chazal are talking about. He says there's 3 parts of this tshuva process. There's Rosh Hashanah, there's Aser Simei Tshuva where we are now, and there's Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah is Keneged Ha'ayin Ro'eh. He says Ha'ayin is not just your eye, it's cognition. So Rosh Hashanah is Keneged, what are my thoughts? And we said this last week. Do I really believe that Hashem is running the show? Do I think that I'm running the show? So Rosh Hashanah, the judgment is on what are my values? What do I really believe about the world? That's Rosh Hashanah. Aser Simei Tshuva is Keneged Halev Chomed, the heart. He says, Aser Simei Tshuva, the cheshbon that we do on ourselves, is what are the psychological and emotional underpinnings of the things that I do. We're going to talk about this. And then comes Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur is Keneged Haguf Oseh Tamata, meaning that Yom Kippur is a day of kapara, of atonement on actions. So really there's thoughts, There is emotions and there's actions. And that's Rosh Hashanah, Aseret Tshuva, Yom Kippur, according to the Nesiv Shalom. Yes, thank you. Thank you. It's very honey. Oh, it's so good. You're so tall. It's great. Thank you. I would have needed a ladder to do that, so thank you. Okay. Now, it's very interesting because Rosh Hashanah, which is the day of judgment on my thoughts, is called Yom Adin, the day of judgment. Yom Kippur, which is the day of judgment on my actions, is called Yom Slicha or Mechila, a day of forgiveness. Why would judgment be connected to thoughts and forgiveness be connected to actions? And here we have a beautiful idea, which is not my focus for today, but I just wanted to throw it in. Where is God more merciful? On my thoughts or on my actions? So the answer is God is more merciful on my actions. Why? Because a lot of people have a lot of good intentions. I wanted to give tzedakah to that poor lady. I didn't have any change. By the time I finally got the change and got back there, she wasn't there anymore. So God knows that in terms of your world of actions, not everything goes the way you want. And even in terms of bad things, I really didn't want to get angry today. I tried so hard not to get angry today. And then something happened and I ended up blowing up. But God knows that I didn't really want to get angry today. So therefore, in the world of actions, God, He uses more mercy because He knows that things don't always go the way you planned. Where is there more judgment? There's more judgment on my thoughts. Meaning, at least I should want the right things. I should want to be a person who doesn't want to get angry. I should want the world to be in a good place. I should want God to be ready to recognize God. And that's why Yom Hadin, judgment, is about thoughts, because Hashem is saying, I know that your actions aren't going to be perfect, but at least your thoughts should be. Meaning you want the right things. I want God to be in charge. I want to be a good person. I want to work on myself. I want. And that's why it's so interesting that the judgment is more on what I want, and the mercy is more on what I do, because people make mistakes. But we're going to get into a very interesting in-between place, which is Aseret Tshuva. And according to the Nesiv Shalom, again, this is a very creative idea. I have not found this idea in many other sources. But he said, what we think about in Aseret Tshuva, Rosh Hashanah was clearly the day of thoughts. You know why? You didn't go like this one time over Rosh Hashanah. It wasn't about your actions. It was about Hashem HaMelech, who's really running the show. What do I believe about that? When you get to Yom Kippur, it's going to be kapara on the actions. And now, according to the Nesiv Shalom, we're thinking about the emotional and psychological underpinnings of what I do and why I do them. Because it's Keneged Halev Chomed, about the heart desiring. Now, what does this mean, the emotional underpinnings? I want to explain something to you. The Gemara talks about this concept called Cheshbon Nefesh, which we're going to really talk about today. And Cheshbon Nefesh is basically this idea of accounting, of being able to, as we said, sit under the tree and think about where do I want to improve, where have I improved, etc. Right? Now, where do we learn about the concept of Cheshbon Nefesh from in the Gemara? So, the Gemara in Eruvin Yud Gimel has a very interesting machlokas between Hillel and Shammai. For 2.5 years, Hillel and Shammai argued about whether the world should have been created, whether man should have been created, or man should not have been created. It's an interesting argument, right? So, as we'll talk about later on in the year, Shammai has a certain perspective and Hillel has a certain perspective. But Shammai's saying, you know what, better if man would not have been created. And Hillel's saying, no, good that man was created. What's the machlokas here? What are they arguing about? They're arguing about statistics. They're arguing about the fact that there are millions, billions of people in this world. Do they fulfill their potential? And Shammai's saying, if the vast majority of the world does not fulfill their potential, then why was man created in the first place? Hillel is saying, you know what? But there are some individuals who do incredible things for the world and incredible self-development. And for those people, it was worth it for man to be created. The Gemara says something at the very end. It says, V'achshav shenivra, but if you were created, yifashpesh b'ma'asav, v'ika de'amra yimashmesh b'ma'asav. The Gemara is telling you something very interesting. You want to fight that statistic? You want to be one of the people that for you it was worth it that the world was created because you fulfill your potential? The Gemara is telling you, I'll tell you how to do it. And the Gemara tells you two very interesting words that are not jargon, normal words that are used. Yifashpesh b'masav, yimashmesh b'masav. Or we're going to call it pishpush and mishmush. Sounds like a cute little thing, okay? What does it mean? So let's take the word pishpush, yifashpesh b'masav. So in modern Hebrew, this is like one of these words which anybody would be impressed if you know them, because most people don't have reason to know this. A flea market is called Shuk HaPishpushim. What do people do at a flea market? They rummage through things superficially, and they say, oh, I could use this. Nah, that I won't use. This would look nice in my kitchen. So to yifash peish b'masav means to rummage through your actions. It means it's somewhat of a superficial way of doing a cheshbon on yourself. In other words, you're going through your actions in a more superficial way. For example, you open up the Vidoy booklet and you say, Lashon Hara, yeah, could improve in that way. Hilchos Shabbos, I actually got better this year. Anger, been controlling it pretty well. Like it's a more superficial, good, bad, medium, that kind of an evaluation. You could go through your day. You could think of it's a more like a systemic, external overview of how am I doing. You can start with the morning. That's some way people like to do. They look through, how am I doing? Do I sit until Sedayim? Do I daven? How do I treat my roommate in the morning? When I go to class, do I make brachos? And you go through your day till the Kriya Shema at night. It's some kind of a way to have an overview of your actions. Some people do it by relationships. How am I as a daughter? How am I as a sister? How am I as a friend? How am I as a roommate? How am I as a student? Meaning you're looking for some kind of systemic way to look at yourself and to come up with some ideas of where I'm doing well, where I could use improvement. I want to say that I heard this in the name of Revolba. Revolba says that if you do not, I think I maybe even said this to you at one point, if you cannot fill your cheshbon nefesh half with the good things about you, then you should not be doing cheshbon nefesh. The purpose of cheshbon nefesh is an uplifting accountability. It's supposed to feel good that I know myself, I'm aware of myself. But most of us as women, we can put a million bad things on the list, and we can't even think of a few good things to put on the list. But cheshbon nefesh is, I have to know, Rav Olba says, oy to somebody who doesn't know his weaknesses, because he doesn't know what he has to improve. And oy vavoy to somebody who doesn't know his strengths, because he doesn't know what his tools are to improve. I have to know what I'm good at. And this is an exercise, because this is the litmus test. There's two litmus tests about good cheshbon nefesh. First of all, did you fill half the good side of the page? And second of all, did you come out with like a little bit of better feeling about yourself? Now, I want to tell you now why the better feeling. And let's go into the concept, what's that?
Better or bitter?
Better feeling. It's supposed to be like, wow, like this like light bulb went up. Wow, I finally understood myself in a certain way. Now I want to tell you what mishmush is. Mishmush, in modern Hebrew, lemashmesh, to feel something. Lemashesh is another way to say it, is to feel something. And the example that we bring is that if the Mesilas Yesharim brings this example. When you go to a store and you see a nice, piece of clothing, you want to buy that sweater, and you feel it to see if it's good quality. So mishmush is going to be a deeper quality control on my actions, both in the good and in the bad. Meaning, I'm a pretty good davener, but I daven well after I have a good night's sleep. Or I like to do chesed with people, but not when I'm in an intimidating environment. It's understanding yourself more deeply. What motivates me? What gets me going? In the good and in the bad. And that's mishmush. So you could view it as wide versus deep, as quality versus quantity, but it's two different ways of looking at yourself. Did I mention here about Lashon Hara, about my own cheshbon on speaking Lashon Hara? Did I ever mention this here? I want to tell you that this is a classic. Every year on my cheshbon nefesh list, Lashon Hara, want to improve. That's the more superficial, pishpush b'masav. One year I heard a shir from Rebbetzin Heller. Has she ever come to speak here? Have you ever heard her? She's great. Yes, you've heard her?
Yeah.
She's fantastic, right? So she had this very interesting idea. She said people spend their whole lives trying to overcome Lashon Hara. 2 halachas a day, 2 hours a day that they don't speak it, this, that, bumper stickers, reminders, whatever. She said, until you understand who you speak Lashon Hara about and why you speak Lashon Hara about them, you're never going to get to the bottom of it. I went home that day and I did a little exercise. I took out a piece of paper and I wrote down the people I'm most likely to speak Lashon Hara about. It was like a light bulb in my head. There was something that all these people had in common. There was something that was threatening to me. There was something that they had that I didn't have that was a sensitive point for me. And all of a sudden I finally understood my Lashon Hara, where it was coming from. And then My work was not to say 2 halachos a day, 2 hours a day. My work is you better build up your confidence in this area because this area is what's causing you to speak Lashon Hara about people. That was the first time in my life I saw a real change in Lashon Hara. That's what mishmush means. It means that I try to think to myself, what's happening here? Why does this happen to me? That's the deeper perspective on yourself. And this fits in very nicely with the Slonim Rebbe. Why? Because he's saying that if Aseres Yemei Tshuva is about understanding the deeper emotional and psychological underpinnings of my faith, it's about looking at that list of things and trying to figure out what's the problem. I want to tell you that I did this one time as an exercise. I wrote down a bunch of different types of people and how a certain thread in their personality can affect a lot of different things. So let's say on your Cheshbon Nefesh list of areas where you want to improve, you say davening with kavana, making sure to make a bracha, Hilchos Shabbos things, being Makabel Shabbos on time. You have a bunch of different things that don't seem connected. And then suddenly you look at the list and you say, disorganization. Because I'm not an organized person, I don't remember if I made brachos. I'm all over the place when I'm davening. I can't get to Shabbos on time. And you realize that there's a certain thread, there's a certain personality trait, which is a thread. I'll give you another one. Lying, jealousy, taking stains off your clothing on Shabbos. Doesn't seem to have anything in common. The insecure person who's not socially confident will lie to get ahead, will be jealous of what other people have, will have a very hard time walking into a room with a stain on Shabbos because she feels like people will notice it. So here she is and has different areas of behavior that seem to be disconnected, but there's a certain thread. If I was more confident socially, I wouldn't have to lie to get ahead. I wouldn't do something that I'm not allowed to do on Shabbos because I'm embarrassed. So this is what the Nasiya Shalom is talking about. He says, use your Aseres Yemei Tshuva to understand where my personality traits affect my behavior. And by the way, it's true in the good. It's true in the good as well. People who do chesed and are sensitive to other people and don't yell and improve their relationship with their grandmother, whatever, there's a certain compassion in my personality, and a lot of the good things that I do are based on that compassion. It's affecting the way you can even become a better davener because of your compassion, because I'm now davening for other people. So I have to understand this. I want to get to a very important point, which is the main point that I want to make today. But I want to tell you that Cheshbon Nefesh is difficult for us. Why is it difficult for us? First of all, finding the good in ourselves is very often not so easy. And admitting the not good is also not easy. And one of the biggest mistakes that we make is that we confuse owning our weaknesses with having created them. You did not create your weaknesses. Hashem gave you weaknesses. And He gave it to the biggest holy rabbi in the whole world too. Everybody has weaknesses. What Hashem wants you to do is to be able to admit that you have them and to be committed to the process of working on them. But it's not like, oh, I can't believe I have that. It's like, we live in a cover-up generation. You have a pimple and you go and you cover it up so nobody will see. We have a blemish, a spiritual blemish, and we feel embarrassed. We have to cover it up. Hashem gave them to me. I didn't create them. I just have to own them myself. I don't have to publicize them to the whole world. But I want to be aware of myself. And that's what Cheshbon Nefesh is really about. The strengths come from Him, so I have to find them somewhere. The weaknesses come from Him. I want to be accountable for them. I want to be able to say, yeah. Now I want to tell you a very interesting idea, and then we're going to get to the main point. I think I mentioned this, that as I teach Musar to women, I learn a lot of texts, and I put it through this sifter of whether this is appropriate for women or not. One of the biggest mistakes that people do is because of most of the texts that are written are not written like Musar texts for man, Musar texts for a woman. So there's a gender neutral, but some things that work for men do not work for women. Women tend to be very hard on themselves. Women also have to have a tendency to maybe a low feeling about themselves sometimes, and some of the ideas are not appropriate. Listen to this idea, and you'll see why. For many years I thought it wasn't appropriate until I heard a different way to view this. There's a pasuk in Tehillim Nun Aleph that says, Zivchei Elokim Ruach nishbara. Let me translate that. The sacrifice that we give to Hashem is our broken spirit. Meaning, we're not living in a time of the Beis HaMikdash where we give karbanos, but the pasuk is telling you, Zivchei Elokim, your karban, your sacrifice that you give to Hashem, Ruach Nishbara, a broken spirit. Rabbi Yisrael Salan says that the biggest protection for Yom Hadin is to give Hashem a broken spirit, your broken spirit. I said to myself, this is not so good for women. People grapple anyway with good moods and feeling depressed and feeling low. What am I saying to somebody? Just like break yourself and give your depression to Hashem on a tray here. Hashem, this is my gift. So for many years I said, maybe if somebody really walks around thinking he's the top of the world, so he's breaking his spirit and giving it to Hashem. But for many women that would not be a good piece of advice. And then I saw a beautiful idea on this that makes it so appropriate for women. Rav Uri Weisblum, who was a mashgiach in the Nachas Halavim Yeshiva in Haifa, wrote a parish on Rav Yisrael Salant. He explains amazingly. He says, your problem, he's talking to me, Ki'ilu, is that you're confusing Ruach Nishbara with Ruach Shavur. He says, when you think of a broken spirit, you think of all those quintessential songs about the broken heart, right? The popular culture, all these songs about having a broken heart. What usually leads to a broken heart? Somebody wanted something, and they didn't get what they wanted. Or they thought they were in a good relationship, and then they got dumped. And then they're with a broken spirit. He says that's not what the Torah is talking to you about. The Torah says, Ruach Nishbara. If anybody here knows dikduk, Nishbar is nif'al. Nif'al is a verb that I do to myself. It's not that somebody broke my heart. It's that I broke my own heart. What does it mean to break your own heart? He says it's not what you think. It just means that most of the world walks around with a hardened heart, meaning, I don't really want to know anything about myself. I don't want to be aware of certain things. Ruach Nishbara means proactive entry into your own heart. It means self-awareness. I'm opening up that heart, and I'm going in there, and I'm understanding, you're a little bit too sensitive. That's why you keep getting into trouble with relationships. Or, you improved in this situation because you finally stopped taking this person so seriously. You go in there and you understand what's going on. He says that's what Ruach Nishbara means. It means that I broke my own heart, but not broken the way we understand it. But it means that I got in there and I was willing to go in there and think about things. I don't have this, I don't go there about my personality. Rav Weissman says something beautiful. He says, not only is this Ruach Nishbara not the quintessential broken heart, it's actually the preventative for a broken heart. And he says something unbelievable. Most people somewhere in life learn about themselves. But you could learn the hard way or the empowered way. The empowered way is when I sit there and I think, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Why is this thing happening to me? That's my own decision, an empowered decision, to sit down and figure myself out. Life will teach you anyway. But when life teaches you when you didn't want to learn, it leads you to a broken heart. When you thought you were going to get that job and you didn't get accepted, that led to a bad feeling. When somebody dumps you and says, sorry, this and this aspect of your personality is not good for me, that hurts. When people reject you, that causes a broken heart. He says, but when you know yourself well, you can prevent those things from happening. I want to give you a mashal for this. Take a lady who is maybe 65 years old. She's married off all of her children, and every single one of her children moves to a different country to try to stay as far away as possible. And she suddenly starts realizing this is not coincidental. None of my children want to be around me. She has the more quintessential broken heart, very broken, that my children all leave me, they don't want to be near me. Imagine if this lady, 45 years earlier, maybe 47 years earlier, was sitting in seminary, not yet married, doing a cheshbon nefesh before Yom Kippur. And she says, you know what? I'm a good person. I have a lot of strengths. But I have a very, very strong critical nature. And if I don't work with this critical nature, my not yet existent husband and my not yet existent children might be very affected by my toxicity. I'm always going to be criticizing them. So at 18, 19, she proactively discovered that she has a critical nature. And she decides that she wants to work on it. And la'at, slowly, she's working on realizing that I'm going to have to control my criticism, I'm going to have to view people positively, I have to work with it. She could have avoided learning that about herself at 65 the hard way. That's the difference between a ruach shavur and a ruach nishbara. One of them is I decide to learn about myself, and the other one is I decide to be in denial until life slaps me in the face, and then I learn something that I really could have known myself. So if we read this back into the pasuk is saying, Zivchei Elokim ruach nishbara. Your gift to Hashem, your sacrifice to Hashem, is your self-awareness. You say, Hashem, I know myself. I have strengths, I have weaknesses, I have things to work on. Here, I'm not in denial. And Rav Salant is saying this is your biggest protection for Yom Adin. So you come to Hashem with the fact that you're not in denial of yourself. Everything I've taught you so far, in every class, I've said to you the same idea, which is that if this was not true in a religious context, it would be true in a completely not Jewish context as well. When I spoke to you about dropping the measuring stick, I said to you, even if I was coaching a non-Jewish person, I'd say, you want to be a healthy person? Drop the measuring stick. When we spoke about Laman Chalukim Chaim, living your life on the level of how can I use my assets to improve the quality of life for other people, I would tell that to somebody who is not into Judaism b'chlal, as being a nice, healthy way to live. This concept of self-awareness is the way to live for everybody. Why? Because people who walk around with this very fake self-image of themselves, because they don't really want to know themselves, they're so fragile. Because every comment, it's like a person whose feet are not on the ground. He's kind of floating in the air, and you could knock him down in 1 second. When a person knows himself, he's very grounded. We'll talk about this more later on in the year. Rav Olba says that a picture of self-knowledge would be if you were standing behind the door of a room, and in that room was your best friend and your worst enemy. And who were they talking about? They were talking about you. And they don't know that you're there, and you're overhearing this conversation. And your best friend is saying, she's so generous, she's so honest, she's so loyal. And your worst enemy is saying, yeah, but don't you see that lazy streak? Or, sometimes she could be a little selfish. And nothing in that conversation would shake you because you knew it all already. That's self-awareness. When we talk about self-awareness for Yom Kippur, again, Yisrael Salant is saying this is your protection for Yom Kippur. And I'm saying this is a healthy way to live. In addition to that, because who wants to think that they're so loving and wonderful when their children want to move as far away as possible from them? For every student who I meet who tells me my mother is very critical and very judgmental and very negative, when I meet the mother, she doesn't think that about herself. Because many people are not committed to self-awareness. And this is what Cheshbon Nefesh is about. It's about self-awareness. Hashem, I didn't create these faults. And you know what? I don't even have a solution to them yet. Why don't we like this idea? If you notice, the Pasuk until does not tell you that your sacrifice to Hashem is perfection. Your sacrifice to Hashem is your awareness. And we know that it could take 70 years to change a midah. So this is going to be a process. I don't have all the answers yet. My theory psychologically is one of the reasons why we don't like Cheshbon Nefesh, is that most of us would rather be either in a state of denial, or I'm willing to admit a problem if I have the solution by tomorrow morning. But to admit that there's something that I have to work on and not yet have a solution and not yet get there, many of us don't like processes. We like results. But an examined life is more about understanding and being in a process. And Hashem knows that it's going to take you a long time. And you know what? You might never even change that midah 100% because He gave that midah to you. But you're aware of it, and you're working on it. That's what He wants. And that's this concept of Zivchei Elokim ruach nishbara. Now, in the 20 minutes that we have left, 15 minutes. Is it 20 minutes? We start at 9. We start at 8:30 and end at 9:20. Okay. We have to talk about the most important idea for today. We said that the Schoonmaker Rebbe said that Rosh Hashanah is about what goes on in your head. Aseret Tshuva is about what goes on in your heart. And Yom Kippur is about your actions. So, when we talk about Yom Kippur, when the person sits under the tree and thinks about what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, what are the underpinnings, and by the way, for the disorganized person, maybe she wants to read a book about organization, and then her Hilchos Shabbos will get better, and her davening and her brachos. I think very often the solution comes to dealing with the underpinning thing, and not even the specific averos, because that will come with the working. Okay. Tshuva for Yom Kippur. So Rabbi Yisrael Salant popularized an idea, which many of you I'm sure heard already in your schools, which is called Kabbalah Shel Kayama B'Bchina Kala. How many of you know what I'm talking about? No? Okay, so we're going to go into it. I'm sure you do. Once I say it, you'll know what I mean. It's the idea of making a permanent change in a very, very small area. Why is this important? We have a problem. Because this time of year is very inspiring, and there's the self-awareness, and there's the wanting to improve, and there's the feeling of spiritual connection. It's all beautiful. The Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva, Perek Bet, Halacha Bet, the Rambam says that what is Tshuva Gemura? What is complete Tshuva? Ya'id alav, and I'll explain the words. These words are very important. Ya'id alav yodea ta'alumot. Hashem, who knows everything, will testify for him. Shelo yashuv lezeh hachit leolam, that he will never ever do this avera again. Let me say this again. Ya'id alav yodea talumot. Hashem, who knows everything, will testify. Shelo yashuv lezeh hachit leolam, that he will never do this avera again. The Yisrael Salant's response to this is the same as yours. Forget it. How many, we feel bad about the Lashon Hara, we feel bad about the things, but Hashem is going to tell me that I will never do this Avera ever again? Most of us cannot say this about anything, really. So Rabbi Yisrael Salant says, you have all this inspiration, but you also want to be Mekayim, the thing that the Rambam calls Tshuva. And Tshuva means that there's something in my life that I'll never do again. Now, what did Rabbi Yisrael Salant do with it? Something fantastic. He says, you know what? You cannot do this about all the many averos that you want to improve in. Those, you have to have regrets. You have to have some kind of plan. How I'm going to try to be better in this area. But the actual Rambam of I will never do this again, he says you have to find one tiny, 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 tiny area in your behavior that you could be Mekayim the Rambam. And this is the work of Aseret Semei Tshuva as well, is the work of thinking, where can I make a change that will be permanent? I always think culturally, it's so interesting. When you ask somebody, are you a Baal Tshuva or not? People will answer, I went to Jewish schools, I didn't, I grew up being Shomer Shabbos, I didn't. Do you know what the word Baal Tshuva means? It means that there's something that I used to do that I don't do anymore. Baalei Tshuva, and the way we talk about them culturally, are lucky that they could say this about hundreds of things. I used to eat that, I don't eat that, I used to wear that, I used to drive on Shabbos, I don't. So many things. But for the FFBs, you want to be able to say this about one thing. There should be something in my behavior that I could say up till September, October 2014, I used to do this, and now I don't do this anymore. And 30 years later, you're going to say, September 2014 is when I stopped doing that thing. We want to do this about one thing.
Yeah. You can say all active. Like, it doesn't have to be something I stopped doing.
It could be something that I started doing. Yes, it could be that I never used to do this, and now I'm doing it. Yes, for sure, completely. I want to tell you something very beautiful about this. There's a married woman who's older than me, who comes to one of my classes, and she once told me something fantastic. She said she was a Baal Tshuva in the cultural sense of Baal Tshuva. I think she became from shortly after she got married. I'm not sure where in her life stages, but it seemed to me from the way she was describing that she was possibly newly married or maybe single and living on her own. I'm not sure. Anyway, so she was in Neve Yerushalayim, and she's learning halacha, and she's learning all about a kosher kitchen and keeping Shabbos, and she buys all these take-home English books that talk about in the Jewish home there must be separation between milk and meat. In the Jewish home we don't flip on lights on Shabbos, etc., etc. And she's making all these changes that Baalei Tshuva make. And she also happened to have bought a book on communication and relationships in the Jewish home. And the book had a line which sounded like the other lines in the other books. In the Jewish home, we don't raise our voice in anger. So what did she think? That's like a halacha that you have to keep like everything else. She started separating milk and meat. She started not flipping on lights on Shabbos, and she stopped raising her voice in anger. After living in a religious community for a while, she realized that all of her neighbors have milk and meat separate. They all don't flip on lights on Shabbos, but there's a nice amount of yelling going on in Jewish homes. So that was like the only kidding, it would be nice if. She said, you know what? It was too late. She thought that was a halacha that she had to change, like the many halachos she changed in her life. And she said, I used to raise my voice in anger, but at that point I stopped raising them in anger, just like I stopped flipping on lights on Shabbos. And I was so humbled when she said this to me, because it's amazing how somebody, it's just a matter of like what you do in your head. She felt just like I don't eat pork, I don't yell. Like I'm not allowed to. A Jewish woman's not allowed to yell. Now I would not tell you that your Kabbalah for the year should be to never raise your voice in anger. Because unfortunately changes are hard for us. There's some special siyata d'shmaya that Baalei Tshuva have that I'm so jealous of. They can make so many permanent changes at one time. But somehow the FFBs struggle with even the one little change that we'd like to make. But this is what we want to do. We want to get to something tiny. Because the real criteria here is consistency. To be Mekayim the Rambam. It doesn't matter how tiny it is. You're embarrassed to even tell your friend what your Kabbalah is because it's so tiny. And it should be tiny. You know why? Because you want to keep it forever. There's a few things going on here with Rabbi Yisrael Salant that I want to say. And I was thinking, we say very often, one of the popular ideas about tshuva is Pitchu li petach kechodo shel machatz. Open up a hole for me like the point of a needle. And then I was thinking in relation to this, what does it mean? What's the point of a needle? It's tiny, 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 but it pierces through and through. And if you take that as a mashal, when you get your ears pierced, so I had my ears pierced over 30 years ago, there's a tiny hole. It's tiny, but it goes through and through, and then the skin grows back around the hole. That's what a Kabbalah Shel Kayama is. I make a tiny change, it's tiny, but it pierces through and through, and my life grows back around the hole. Used to do that? Don't do that anymore. Or now I'm doing something that I never used to do, that's a mitzvah. It could be a tiny thing, but the fact that there's something there that wasn't there, and it's permanent, and it's here to stay, that's the Kabbalah Shel Kayama. And the beauty of it is consistency. To be able to say 50 years later, when I was in seminary, I made this change and I stuck with it forever. There's something so powerful about that. Rabbi Yisrael Salant says that if you take all the inspiration of this time period, and the davening, and the crying, and the tshuva, and the everything, and you put it on one side of a scale, and you put your tiny little permanent change on another side of the scale, he says, Tachriyahi, this is the one that is more weighty than anything. We don't understand the power of this. We don't understand how Hashem loves this. And this is what we're trying to do. So I want to tell you that the effort and the intelligence that you have to use now this week is to think about a change. Because I can tell you, I'm the master of bad Kabbalahs. When I was your age, I used to think of ideas. They were way over my head. They kept for like a month or two, and then they kind of petered out. And then I started realizing this is not about feeling, wow, that's a great Kabbalah. This is about feeling it has to be tiny enough that I could do it forever. It's not going to be physically challenged. It's not going to be psychologically challenged. When I'm 50, I'll be able to do it. When I'm 80, I'll be able to do it. That's what we're thinking about. So I want to tell you this unbelievable idea that I read this year. The Alter of Kelm says that all inventions that are ingenious, there's a tremendous amount of effort that goes into the research. But the real-time application of the invention is supposed to be easy. I'll give you an example. Researching cures for sicknesses. So you have this major team of brilliant, brilliant research doctors who are trying to find a cure for a certain sickness. And they spend years and years and years researching and testing and guinea pigs and testing and testing. When they finally come up with the cure, the sick person in real time, all he has to do is pop the pill. That's a good creation. The ingenious went into the finding the cure, but the application in real time has to be easy. The creation of any kind of gadget, even take something like the phone. Is it Alexander Bell? Is that the name of who created the phone? So, what's that? See that? Brown, right? You said something. Right. You bring me back to my Alexander Graham Bell. So he created something which was supposed to be easy to use. When you pick up the phone and it works, that's a sign of a good creation. And the opposite is also true. When you have a computer program which is too complicated to work, it's a sign that the person who created it didn't put enough thought into how to do this properly. He might have been a genius. He thought you were going to be a genius to know how to use it. And it's like, good creations take a lot of planning, but they're very easy to use real time. The Alter of Kelm says that's what your Kabbalah is supposed to be like. Think carefully. This one, am I really going to stick with it? Sounds amazing now. What's it going to look like in 3 years? What's it going to look like in 5 years? What's it going to look like at different stages of my life? This one, too complicated. I won't do this. Is this going to work with me? I'm a very sensitive person. This might happen to me when I'm a little bit out of control sometimes. No, not that one. A lot of effort is put into the planning so that at the real time, it's easy. And that's really what the Kabbalah has to be. Because it has to be something which is not going to challenge you. It's not going to be hard to remember. It's not going to be hard to apply. And you have to think about this. I want to give you a few examples of things that people have told me that worked for them. So, it's very interesting. If you're an organized person, you might say a certain kind of Kabbalah because you'll remember when to do it, how to do it. If you're not such an organized person, you might need a Kabbalah that's just very, very easy. Like, I don't eat that anymore. I don't wear that anymore. Something which becomes like a cutoff. I have to tell you about myself that after the Lashon Hara thing that I did after I heard Rebbetzin Heller speak, I decided on a certain kind of Kabbalah because I really wanted to make a change in Lashon Hara. So I decided that I'm going to pick one person who I will not talk about anymore. Because to say I'm not going to talk Lashon Hara after 12 o'clock at night, I'm going to forget. To say I'm going to learn these halachos, to say I'm going to stop myself to say, wouldn't work. But just like I don't put pork in my mouth, I don't say that person's name in a bad context. It was like a cutoff, it worked very, very well for me because I didn't have to remember anything. I just had to know that person, no Lashon Hara. Now, in order to do this properly, if I would have chosen somebody who was really challenging to me, wouldn't be good. If I'm going to choose somebody who might be challenging in 10 years, wouldn't be good. If I'm going to choose somebody who I don't even know exists, then it's not really a Kabbalah. I don't even know the person. It has to be somebody in the periphery of my life where, and this is a very important idea that Rosh Hashanah says, it's not a Yetzer Hara for me to speak about this person, but I could find myself speaking about them. This is very important. Rav Yisrael Salan says, if you want your Kabbalah to work, do not pick an area where you have a Yetzer Hara. Because then your Yetzer Hara might trip you up, if not now, in 5 years. Sometimes there's certain people who we're tempted to speak about, and sometimes we just say something like, why did I say that? I wasn't even tempted to do it. Rav Yisrael Salan says that you have to pick for your Kabbalah, and this is a concept in business. There's a concept called low-hanging fruits. I don't know if anybody knows what I'm referring to. I happen to have a pomegranate tree in my garden, and my son wanted to pick a pomegranate before Rosh Hashanah. So we went out, and it was very easy to get the ones that are at eye level. Those are called the low-hanging fruit. And then you have the ones that you need a ladder to get, and then you have the ones that you need some professional companies to come get. Same is true in business. You start a business. Your low-hanging fruit are the people who need your service who are in your area. You don't even have to advertise to get them. And then you have the people you have to advertise, and then there are people who are even harder to get. Rav Yisrael Salan says the same is true with tshuva. Many averos have fruit that are way too high for me. As soon as my Yetzer Hara is going to challenge me, that's a high-hanging fruit. My Kabbalah has to be about the low-hanging fruits. Something that's pretty easy to access. It's not going to challenge me so much. I don't have a big Yetzer Hara for it. It's not going to be difficult. And that's where my Kabbalah has to be. Yes?
What about...
Your name, first of all.
So during a Saraswati Shiva, what if you take on Kabbalah? Maybe it is a little bit over the top, but it's only for a Saraswati.
Yes. Okay. That's a completely different thing. There are a lot of minhagim that people have, where there's certain things that they're not makbid on, certain chumras and kashrus, or things that they're not makbid on all year round, but dafka they take on for Saraswati Shiva. That's something different. That's because I want to be in this atmosphere of, raising myself up. That will not be the same as your Kabbalah. That one's over after Yom Kippur, This is something that I think that I can handle for a long, long time. And that's really what I'm trying to do. Okay? I'm going to give you an example. I said the Lashon Hara thing. That might be hard, but you'd have to pick somebody who's not challenging. I'll give you another example. I was once researching Hilchos Brachos, and I felt that I wanted to improve a Brachos. So I'm going through one of these Brachos books, and it's talking about not leaving the room before you make a bracha achrona, having a certain amount of food for the brachas, knowing clearly which bracha. And everyone, I'm thinking Kabbalah Shel Kayama. No, these are areas that I'd like to improve in, but I'm not going to be able to be Mekayim the Rambam. That I'll never do this mistake again, because life gets overwhelming sometimes. I'm trying to imagine a phone ringing, a baby crying, and this, that. And remember, did I make a bracha? Did I not? Finally, I came across one little halacha that said that you're supposed to hold your food in the right hand before you make a bracha. Now, that's little, but I said to myself, okay, imagine myself in different situations. Is that something that I could stick to? I said, because worst comes to worst, if it's in my left hand, I flip it into the right. If my right hand is not available right now, I wait till it is. I don't have to eat it in a second. I can make the bracha soon. So that was a Kabbalah that was realistic. For some of you, that might be too hard. That might not be so realistic. You have to work with yourself. It's like the Alter of Kelm said, you're creating an invention right now. So you're thinking, what's going to work with me? What will I be able to stick with? Yes? Good, thank you. Okay, my husband makes fun of me. He says, shopping Lashon Hara, one person at a time. You know, he said, when you get to the end of your life, you'll have like a book of all the people you're not allowed to say Lashon Hara about. If you find an area of a Kabbalah that works, and it's so good that you mentioned, I was just talking to my husband in the car about that point. He said, did you tell your students that Rabbi Yisrael Salant meant that if the Kabbalah is going well, you can extend it a little bit? And I would have forgotten to say today if you wouldn't have brought it up. There's something called a minimum and a maximum in a Kabbalah. Meaning, if you're nervous about a certain idea, you could say, at least, I will not do this for the next 6 months. At most, I'd like this to be a lifetime, okay? Or at least, I won't, I don't know, whatever that is, you know? Meaning that you can definitely have a certain fluctuation where the minimum you're going to keep, and if you're doing well, you can add more, okay? So yes, that's actually the purpose of the Kabbalah Shel Kayama, is that the inspiration that comes from mastering the small things should give me koach to also affect bigger things, okay? And I want to just end with this idea. We're going to have to end. But I used to think maybe this is like a little bit of a cop-out. I have some big averas, that make me feel really bad. And I'm going to start like holding my apple in the right hand. Oh, come on. Rabbi Yisrael Salant turns around easy and hard, big and little. He says the little things are big, and the big things are little. What does that mean? When you have something where you have a big Yetzer Hara for it, you want to plan to change. But Hashem knows that for you to be able to say, this is the one that I'm going to be kind of the Rambam, Hashem knows that's too hard for you. He understands why you're not making a Kabbalah about that. But it's the little things that are not challenging, that I really just could do this. It's not such a big deal. He says those become big. Why? Because Hashem is looking to see how are you doing with those. Because it shows your attitude. I'm going to give you a mashal. If I ask my child to clean up his toys, and he has like all these shelves that are bigger than him, and I walk into the room and he says to me, Mommy, like, you know, the toys were like too out of my reach. The first thing I'm going to do is look at the eye level ones. If everything that was at his eye level is organized, then I'll say, you know, you're right, cutie, you did a great job. I'll do the high ones. But if he's saying to me, Mommy, they're out of my reach, and then I look at the eye level ones and he didn't clean up anything, then the whole thing he didn't take seriously. Rabbi Yisrael Salant says you need to pick the low-hanging fruit, because then Hashem gives you schar as if you did the high-hanging fruit as well. He knows you're sincere, He knows you're trying, and He knows that those are out of your reach for right now. So He gives you schar because your sincerity, it's like a sweeping sign of your sincerity. So even when it's ridiculous, and you know what everybody always says, you take a Kabbalah, then cut it in half, take on even smaller than you thought you were going to take on. Because the whole point is consistency. I want to be able to say in 20 years from now that when I was in seminary in 2014, that's when I made that tiny change, and my life grew back around it like the earring hole that grows back around it. So it's tiny. It doesn't have to be impressive. It's not supposed to be impressive. It's supposed to be permanent. Yes?
Does it matter if it's the
What's that? I'm sorry?
Does it matter if it's the
No. In fact, at one point I was telling my students to pick one Ben Adam L'Chavero, one Ben Adam L'Makom. But you know what? For some of us, if we're experiencing this the first time, just pick one. I have found that when I take a few, I don't remember any of them properly. You want to be able to say, this is still in my pocket next year. So it might be worth it to only take one. If you know that you're the kind of person who can hold with two and remember both and will do both, then two is great. But I just, if you're scared about that, just pick one in any area, and an area that's not challenging. That's the idea. If you have, I do want to say this point. If you have a few choices, and one of them is an area of halacha, and the other is the area of midos or chumrah, you might want to take the halacha one first. What I gained from my Lashon Hara Kabbalah was that Lashon Hara is a serious avera. So if you can't think of one in a serious category, then just go for whatever you can find. But if you have a choice, it would be good if it would be in an area of halacha. That's the only criteria really that gives preference to one thing over the other. The only main criteria here is the Rambam, is the consistency. And that's really what I'm trying to accomplish. Okay, so we have to end here for today. Gemar Chazima Tova to everybody. I hope you have a very inspiring Yom Kippur. And hopefully we'll walk away with a little thing in our pocket that will still be here next year and many years to come. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Can you shut this? Oh, you're shutting this off. Okay, great.
Is there any way